Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's Throwback Thursday session. Before we get started, just going to go over a couple of quick things. As always, if you have any questions, just feel free to put them in the GoToWebinar panel. This is a recorded session, but we do have Nate here live, and he'll be answering questions for you after the session. Let's see. Slides and recordings. So slides are in the handout section for today. This recording is from iAdmin Fall 2020. So I think we're going to send it to you via email, but if we don't get that, just double check our iAdmin page and the Fall 2020 recordings. Speaking of iAdmin, since this is a session from there, we have already announced our iAdmin dates for this fall. So you should be saving the date for, it is November 9th and November 10th. We are not releasing any other details yet, but I put those dates on your calendar. Shortly, we'll give you a place to sign up should you be interested for more information and get ready to register. Okay. Our upcoming events, next Friday, we have Lori LeBlanc doing backup options for IBMI. Then that following Wednesday, August 25th, Chris Flickle doing iBasics, basics of monitoring your system and what you should be looking at every day. The following 2 weeks later, Steve Pitcher will be doing basics of system values, part 1, security, and that's going to be 4 different parts. So you'll see that come over. The following week, Steve McIver will be doing basic of system values, part 2, system control. To register for any of these events, go to itechsoul.com/events. Just a quick reminder for anyone out there, if you have not signed up for our newsletter, this goes out monthly. There's multiple articles, there's a letter from Pete. If you're not subscribed, you're probably missing out. So there's a link here below and I can throw it in the chat as the session goes on in itechsoul.com/itech-newsletter. Also, we are going to be doing ball games this year. We are going to be doing the New Hampshire Fisher Cats and the Worcester Woo Sox on September 14th and September 22nd, respectively. You can register for each of these at info.itechsoul.com/baseball. Want to let everyone know we are going to be renting a private suite, so we'll be social distant from everyone else in the stadium. We'll have an inside and an outside room. We are asking all registrants to be fully vaccinated for COVID-19. So if you're in either one of these areas, sign up. We're really looking forward to having a great and safe time. And almost there. Lastly, check out our iTip videos. These are on YouTube. If they're just 2 to 3 minute videos with some helpful information. Let me see what else I got for you. And then lastly, if you learned something today and you wonder how it could apply to your system, just shoot me an email, hdinho@itechsoul.com, and I will get you scheduled a meeting. So with that, I am going to start the recording. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and Nate will be coming on live afterwards to answer your questions.
Thanks, Heather. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Hopefully we've all had a chance to fill up our coffee mugs there in that little break and take a sip of mine. So yeah, I'm going to talk this morning a little bit about how you can get into some of the deeper customization of ACS by editing the .properties file. And this will go a little beyond the vanilla install, maybe take a lift or a look behind the curtain. If you're planning on rolling this tool out to a large group of users, then you're probably going to need to get into this. So this will give you all a little bit of an introduction into what it can do. So just a quick agenda here. I won't belabor the point. The session's divided up into some sections here, but we'll talk about why, what, how, actually look at a .properties file, and then talk about some access control, how you can protect it, and then how it feeds into deployment. So first off, why do we want to mess with the bowels of ACS in the first place? Well, of course, you can think of several reasons. What I've got on the title card here is more tongue-in-cheek than anything else. There are installation scripts for Mac and Linux. Although if you're using an old enough version of ACS, you may find there's only a Windows application folder in there. And if that's the case, you need to grab the latest version because we have installers for all of the platforms now. Of course, all of that said, cross-platform considerations are still a driver here. You need a different script for each OS. So if you're looking to push out a silent install to multiple platforms, or if you need to devise a standardized process for like your desktop support team to run on any OS, then the installation scripts may not necessarily be the best way forward. Most organizations are now employing tablets, other non-Windows devices in their operations. And of course, the current pandemic is forcing more users to work remotely and from their own devices, many of which may not be Windows based. So the days of corporate monoculture and desktop client support are over. We need to be remembering about multiple platforms. Probably the biggest reason, though, is the simple fact that not every possible option for ACS is in either the installation script or even the GUI itself. The ACS software is very flexible, as we'll see in the next few slides. IBM has strived to make it easier to maintain than any of its predecessors, but with flexibility comes complexity, and some of that complexity is hidden below the interface. Large-scale deployments, another driver. How are you planning on getting ACS onto every machine in your organization? How does it need to behave when it gets there? Do you want to go to each end user, kick them out of their chair, sit down at their PC and run an installer? No, we don't want to do that. Much better to specify our configuration in a single file and then push that out along with the software. And finally, just personal preference comes into play. Some people are just more comfortable working in text mode. So if you're the sort of person who gets into heated debates over which text editor to use, and this will be right up your alley, I think. So why do we need this file? What's it for? Well, in a nutshell, because Client Solutions is different from a traditional installed application. Software that's tied to a platform uses the conventions and interfaces provided by that platform to handle aspects of installation, configuration, and maintenance. Sure, config files are a thing with traditional apps, but when developing for multiple platforms, the concept is much more appealing. File-based configuration provides a dependable and relatively standard method of config, which is accessible to all platforms. The ACS-based package is Java-based, which makes it portable. The configuration needs to be portable as well. Storing it in an OS-provided location, like the Windows registry, for example, isn't really a viable option for this. If you look at the contents of the ACS directory, you're going to find lots of stuff in there. We've got documentation, icons, fonts, launcher programs, and installer scripts, all in subfolders. And then in the top level, we have only 3 things. There's a quick start guide. Okay, that's pretty standard for things these days. We've got this properties file that we're talking about, and we've got a jar file. And in case you're not aware, out of all of these files and folders, the only one that really matters is ACS bundle.jar. That's it. Everything else is just support and convenience. ACS will actually run on its own without any of the rest, so long as Java is installed properly on the PC. If you've got your file association set up right for jar files, you can actually just double click it and it'll run. Although, of course, since this presentation is about the properties file, then maybe we should say that 2 of them matter. At any rate, the takeaway here is that unlike a traditional application with OS dependencies and a specified structure that has to remain intact, ACS doesn't have that overhead. We can pick it up and move it anywhere. So we have these install scripts that I've touched on. And so, what does it do? Why does it exist? If we've got a properties file, why do we need an installer? Well, obviously the aim is user experience and probably familiarity. Windows users in particular are going to expect an installation process for every app, and the script fills that paradigm for them. For Mac and Linux, it can act as an aid for novice users. As you'll see, the installer hides some of the more common customization options behind a friendly push button interface. So you don't need to whip out your text editor for every setup. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but we're all here because we want to go a little further down the rabbit hole. Okay, so if any of you have been through the installer, and my example here is going to be on a Windows platform, you know that basically it just asks you a series of yes or no questions, seemingly at random. Conventional advice for admins, at least, is just say yes to everything, partially because we want access to everything and partially because some of us can't be bothered to read everything. Oh, right, the ULA, bother. You get the idea. It looks like an install, smells like an install, and for all intents and purposes, it accomplishes all the same tasks. Convenient. Unfortunately, it's still a little cumbersome, and on some PCs, it can take forever to run. On the bright side, the installer isn't really doing anything we can't do ourselves. So behind the scenes, the installer is really just using your answers to edit the properties file for you. That does make single basic install relatively easy, but it's limited to the questions that IBM's decided to ask. No more, no less. Why that subset? Well, of course, no one wants to sit through a 3-hour install, and you don't want to intimidate the user with too many options. The current set's already a bit like a customs interview, so making it even more comprehensive wouldn't be an improvement. But since the installer is limited in scope, that means we have more to uncover and tinker with if we're really willing to scratch the surface a bit. So let's take a look now at what we can play with. Just kind of upfront, in the interest of time, I don't have everything in the slide deck here. I'm going to go into detail on the real high level stuff, the things you're going to be most interested in if you're customizing this application for a deployment or for different sets of users. There's more. Make sure you read the documentation. I can't cover everything here, but I've got most of the things anybody might be interested in tweaking. Just a few words of wisdom though before we get started. If you answer yes to everything in the installer script, or if you just completely bypass the installer and launch an unmodified, pull it out of the zip, stick it on your desktop and launch it, you'll find the .properties file as delivered from IBM is pretty light in the way of actual configuration content. There's really only one defined setting in there, and it actually starts out set to a blank value, nothing. The file is certainly not empty though. What you'll find in there is a ton of documentation, which we'll see here in a minute when I get to the live demo. The file's about 99.7% documentation. And anyone interested in tweaking ACS, this is your required reading. Not everything that you can do is documented in the file itself, but most of it is. As for other considerations, familiarize yourself with the format of the file. Basically, it's pretty straightforward. Some setting equals some value. Don't be afraid to make too many mistakes. The software is pretty forgiving. If you dump something in there that it doesn't understand, it pretty much ignores it. So long as you don't change the character encoding of the file or dump a whole bunch of malformed text in there, it pretty much ignores anything that it can't handle. And you'll see that there's a put an asterisk at the beginning of the line, and it becomes a comment. So you can make your own notes in there. That said, take a backup first. This should go without saying, but I'll just throw that out there so nobody says I didn't warn you. Up first, ACS base directory. This setting controls where the application puts user data. We're talking about the user's customization settings, emulator settings, key map files, system configurations, data transfer definitions. Modifying this is going to go heavily into deployment scenarios. Do you want your user settings to be stored in a central location so they always get their own screen colors regardless of which workstation they log in from? You can do that here. Are you creating a portable install and want everything on a thumb drive? We can do that too. The default value for this setting is blank, which will result in ACS sticking this stuff in a location that is actually OS dependent. Generally speaking, it will be somewhere under the user's home directory or documents folder. Wherever that happens to be physically located on the machine in question is left up to the operating system. For example, on modern Windows PCs, it goes in the user's documents folder, which I've got my example there. This is the only thing that's actually defined in active, i.e. not commented out in a default properties file, and it will be set to blank, which is that OS dependent behavior. The include and exclude rules are the other big component of user customization. These directives allow us to expose only those functions of ACS which the user needs. This cuts down on clutter so the user isn't overwhelmed with options they don't need or understand, and it can help with security, following the principle of least privilege. This is the primary focus of the questions asked by the Windows install script, which covers most of the common items you might want to exclude from the user's view, but by no means all of them. Note that on these you use one or the other, not both. Exclude comps is a deny list and include comps is an allow list. And we can use these settings with every conceivable function of ACS, including every single item which appears in the ACS main menu and a whole lot more. This is not even a comprehensive list of what's out there, and the examples given in the properties file don't cover everything either. This is a spot where you will need to go dig into the getting started HTML document for full details. There's just too much to list here. It's probably a good page and a half of different components that you can either exclude or include. Another point to note is that these directives apply not just to the display of these features in the GUI, but to their execution. Command line and shortcut creation is kind of beyond the scope of this presentation, but it is possible to invoke ACS features directly, either through a shortcut, which you'll see me do later in the demo, or directly from the command line. These restrictions are checked at runtime. So attempting to access a restricted function, even without going through the menu, won't be allowed. So it's not just security through obscurity. It is an actual function block. Here's an example of a kind of a convenience function, really. This setting, the update location settings can tell your ACS clients where to go to find an update package for ACS itself. You can create a repository on the IFS of your IBM I system and keep it up to date. When configured properly, the end user can use the help check for updates menu in ACS, and they'll not only see if an update's available, but they'll get a one-click push to update button that will download the update from the system I and install it for them. There are some restrictions and caveats here, so read the Getting Started guide on this as well. There are also PTFs out there for 7.2, 7.3, and 7.4 that will create the repository for you in a default location and populate it with the ACS software. The PTF numbers I have here in the slide deck are when the initial PTFs were introduced. Every ACS release, they will get superseded with the new packages. So look them up and pay attention to get the supersede. You want to get the latest version. This works with ACS version 1.1.8.3 and later. So it's been available for the last 3 versions. And there's a bunch more. I've got this screen roughly broken down into things that either customize client behavior and appearance versus things that are focused on management and locations that would be used in deployment. Suffice to say that not everyone will find all of this stuff useful or interesting. Again, documentation goes into great detail on all these options, what they do, how they function. Some of it is RFEs that customers have submitted and things like that. All right, Let's take a few minutes to look at a real properties file and see how that actually works, how it affects the running copy of ACS. I'm going to try to switch over to my other screen. There we go. So I have here I've actually portableized this. I made it so that it's self-contained. You can see I've got a configuration directory up here, and I have opened up our config.properties file. And as I said, a pound at the beginning of any line, a number sign, if you will, denotes comment. So my text editor has highlighted those in green, so you can tell what's comment and what's not. I've got a couple of things defined. The first is the ACS base directory. Instead of blank, I have told it I want to look in that configuration file. That directory is just located under wherever ACS happens to be. So I could pick this folder up, drop it on a thumb drive, or drop it on another PC, and it's always going to look at, where am I, and I go relative to that. There are some other variables or keywords in here that are defined. These are really helpful if you're planning a central repository of user configuration. The first deployment I ever did with this, we stored all the user configs centrally so that if any hot desking was done, then they would always get their settings. They got their colors, they got their emulator session, they got their key mapping. It allowed us to, just make the user experience just that more streamlined. So in this case, I've configured that, and we'll play with exclude comps here because it's a really good example of how we make a change and it affects the system. And I think this is probably the piece that most people are going to be interested in. But as you can tell, there's a lot more down here, and a lot, plenty of settings to play with. Actually, I forgot myself. I configured an SSH client, so we'll take a look at that too. So let's bring up the main ACS window, and we'll take a look at what right now. I've got all the options here. I got a lot of things set up for this system. If we look at like my preferences here, we can even tell that the local settings, it's pointing to this ACS folder, to the config, right? It's not going to my normal place, which would be in my documents somewhere. It's actually pointing to this folder that I have sitting out on my desktop. So that's a good thing. That means if I save something, I'm going to end up saving it in this specific location. And you can, I can open up my session manager. There are my sessions. And I can even change my directory, and you'll see there's where I'm at. I'm way down below this, this ACS folder. So I've got all of these little links configured, and of course they work. I can start an emulator session, right, and I get connected to the system, and that works, right? Well, let's say I'm going to deploy this for an end user, who doesn't need access to the database, and we don't want them messing with the management, the system configuration. Let's go ahead and see how we can just change that exclude comps setting to exclude those options. So there's a couple of groups here, and we'll limit first the database. We'll tell it we don't want this user to have database, and we'll also say, well, I tell you what, I'm just going to do the session manager. We'll leave the other system configurations in there for the moment. I'm going to save that, and if I save that and go back here and look, you'll see my time just got updated, so I did actually save it. Let's close out ACS, and now let's reopen it. And you'll notice now that my database options are completely gone, and I've lost access to the session manager function. I don't have that. Well, maybe the user thinks, oh, I've got a link on my desktop because that's a default icon. I'm going to launch that session manager from there. And that's not going to work because it's going to tell us in a minute. Oh, that plugin. I wish they'd change this message, but this is what you get when something is restricted. The session manager can't be located. In this case, it means that it was they weren't accessed or authorized to it. But you can tell I can't even get to that function directly from the from a shortcut. It's just not going to work. And then the SSH client I had configured earlier, you'll see I can actually put in a I actually click the SSH link and I will get the my PuTTY session opens up. So I've got that configured and it knows where that is. So, there's an example of some of the functionality that you can get out of this thing. Again, don't forget there are plenty of other settings in here if you need to change some of the behavior of the of macros, change the location of where SQL scripts are. That's those options are out there, and most of that stuff is not exposed in the GUI itself. We'll go back to the presentation here. So now that we have our properties file all ready to go out to our users, what's going to stop them from editing it or deleting it and undoing all of our hard work? Well, the simplest solution is, of course, just make the thing read only. If they can't modify or delete it, problem solved. But sometimes you need to do something a little more advanced, or perhaps you just want to be sneaky. So for instance, you can actually put the properties file inside the jar file. A jar file is really nothing more than a glorified zip file. So you can actually open it up with pretty much any file compression utility and just add the ACS config.properties file in there. That creates a truly portable single file deployment. Of course, it assumes that there's a Java installed on the PC you're going to run on it, but that works. Just note that if the file also exists outside the jar file in the same directory, it will take the one outside will take precedence over the one inside. And you'll also see in my screenshot here of the zip of the jar file, the ACS config.default. Well, that's the default version of the properties file, and that's what gets used if no properties file is found at all. You can also get fancy if you've got an admin who knows their stuff. I've seen clients serve up different configurations to different user groups through a complex system of like symlinks and permissions. Very slick, probably overkill for most environments, but if you've got a lot of different user groups and you really need to do deep customization for different workflows, then that's an option. As you can probably tell, much of this goes hand in hand with large-scale deployment. Actually deploying ACS is really beyond the scope of today's discussion, but there are a few points I want to throw out here. If you're planning a major rollout, think carefully about where you want all the pieces to go. IBM has made a lot of recent additions to assist in managing the local PC install method with things like the update repository. However, there are still pros and cons to both local installs and central file share deployments. No two environments are the same. No one solution's right for everybody. Take into account the capabilities of your IT staff to support whatever configuration you come up with. Within the .properties file itself, the heavy hitter directives are the ACS-based directory. Auto import, which I didn't really touch on, but it does exist. You can import a base configuration, including system configurations automatically, and the update locations. These will be the keys to making sure ACS puts things where you want them and goes to the right place for updates. And then don't forget the other settings that deal with locations, like SQL scripts and examples. Deployment considerations have their own section in the documentation, so don't skip that. Make no mistake, ACS deployment for a large organization is a project with a capital P. Something we've helped a number of clients with, and like many things, 90% or more of the job is just doing your homework. Since this has been focused on the more advanced aspects, I've skipped or made assumptions about some of the basics. So to close out, I thought I'd include a few other ACS resources in case you missed or needed a refresher on any of that. I've got a list here of different tips and tricks webinars we've done in the past on ACS related topics, and a link to the our iTips repository. If you haven't seen our iTips, they're quick 2 to 4 minute videos that go over a useful feature or trick that you can use to make your life easier. So there's several out there that touch on ACS. And of course, wouldn't be complete without a link to the IVM page. And with that, that's all I've got. So we can take some questions.
All right. We are going, hopefully I closed the right thing. We are going to bring Nate back on. Nate, you're here, I see you.
Yes, I am.
Okay, so we are gonna go to some questions now. I'm just gonna share my screen too to make that screen pop go away. All right, I'll let you to the questions.
Yeah, I've got them here. So let's see. Does auto update require admin rights? If ACS, if you installed it as an all users option, then yes, the user will need admin rights to do the one-click update. If it was installed as a single user, then no, it'll be installed in their user profile already, and they'll have write access to that. So, let's see here. Looks, oh, okay, I don't think that's a question. For the location, is there one that will override the other? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I know what the context was there, Susan. Oh, for the config, is there one that will, okay, I get it. So the configuration, the ACS config.properties file that's inside the jar file is like the last resort. So if there's a ACS config.properties in the same directory as the jar file, it'll use the one that's outside the directory first, then it'll go to the one that's inside the jar. As far as getting any others to override, you would need to do something fancy with the file permissions, right? To redirect a user to the one that you want. Hopefully that makes some sense. How do you install a component that was missed in the initial install? So when you go through that install script, if you answer no to something and now you don't have it, just run the install script again and say yes, it will redo your config, your properties file for you. What's a good resource for deploying ACS using a central source? I don't have a good example that I could just point to. The problem being is that a central deployment like that, a network install, is going to be very different based on your network infrastructure, you know, what you have out there and your resource available. So it's very difficult to come up with a good example, you know, that could be used as a, you know, like a template. So much is going to depend upon, you know, what your network admins have available to them, what they're capable of, you know, and their kind of their familiarity and what your environment looks like. You know, I mean, it's down to basically deciding on a place to put things and a place to to keep the config if that's what you're going to do, and then how are you going to deploy the shortcuts. But you know, your answers to those questions are going to be very, very different based on your situation, how many users you have, what their job roles are, and what have you. So the best resource on deploying ACS like that is really just the help documentation itself. You know, although we can help you, of course. We've done that before, and I'm sure we'll do it again. Can you restrict the transfer to and allow transfer from? I believe you can. I think there is a separate directive for the data transfer to and the data transfer from, but give me a moment and I will actually confirm that for you. Maybe not. Yeah. Oh, upload and download. Yes. So yes, you can. Yeah. There are separate allow, deny directives for upload and download. I thought that there were, but I just wanted to confirm that by looking at the documentation. Where can you find the full list of the component customization? It's in the getting started.html. It is in section 9.1.26. It's about halfway down the file. That's where I just looked to find the answer to the previous question. Since the properties file lives in the public folder, how could we persist the user settings in a non-persistent VDI environment? Every log off the VM is deleted and the user would never get access to that same VM public folder. That's a situation where you definitely would want to use some sort of network deployment, Stella, because you're going to need to put that, you're going to need to put their, you know, the application and the settings themselves into a non-volatile location. I would definitely consider putting those on a file server, something close to where the VM cluster is, that has a good connection, and point all of the shortcuts there, and keep the user config there, and keep the properties files there, and the application itself, rather than baking it into the VM image. Because then it'll be persistent across their logins. All right. Do you know how that would affect SQL viewpoint? I know ACS is a prereq. I'm not familiar enough with the SQL viewpoint software to answer that for sure. I would imagine that SQL viewpoint has some way of, you know, identifying where ACS is installed, but you would need to ask the vendor on that one. I'm sorry. All right. Looks like that may be all of the questions. Oh, well, we got one more here. We got a couple more coming in here at the last minute. After downloading ACS, where should you copy the zip file to run the install? You can put it anywhere. It'll run from anywhere on your computer. I usually just unzip it to my desktop. You know, I launch ACS via a bat file. Okay. Yeah. you can use a bat file. And if you're doing a network, is there a smart way to hide the DOS box? There are ways to get Windows not to show the DOS box when you're using it, when you're running a batch script. That's kind of outside. One, it's outside the scope of this conversation, and two, it's really outside of my wheelhouse. I know enough about Windows to get myself into trouble. I'm not an expert batch script programmer, but I do know that there are some methods you can use to suppress the command line window. You know, it may just be worth, you know, using a shortcut instead, you know, because what I see there in your batch script could be done just as a shortcut directly to the executable, and achieve the same result, and you wouldn't get the batch script come up. But if you're using the batch script specifically because you need cross-platform, then yeah, that wouldn't be an option. So I understand. That I would look up. I would do a little research on suppressing the command line there, Johan. And I think that's the end of our question list. Heather, I'll hand it back over to you for a little more housekeeping. And thanks everybody for taking the chance to take in this session again. Because yeah, there's a lot you can do with this thing that, you know, if you want to get fancy with it, you sure can.
Well, and Nate, thank you. Great job on your presentation at iAdmin Fall, and great job answering questions today. And we hope to get you on another session this fall for iAdmin.
We've got some more stuff in the pipeline. Don't worry. There's plenty to talk about.
We've got some things up our sleeves. So just wanted to go over a couple of quick upcoming virtual events for everyone. Next Friday, Lori LeBlanc will be doing a Tips and Tricks backup options for IBMI. The following Wednesday, we're going to have Chris Flick doing an iBasics, basics of monitoring your system, what you should be looking at every day. Then on Wednesday, September 8th, Steve Pitcher will be doing iBasics, Basics of System Values Part 1. Please know this is Part 1 of 4. The following week, Stephen MacGyver will be doing Basics of Systems Value Part 2, Systems Control. To register for any of these events, you can go to itechsoul.com/events. And then also, let me get this on the screen for you. We are going to be doing our baseball games again. I know we did a couple of them back in 2019. They were a great success. We are going to be at the New Hampshire Fisher Cats on September 14th and the Worcester Woo Sox on September 22nd. We have rented out a private suite, so we'll be able to be socially distant from everybody else in the stadium. We will have indoor access to our own spot of seats, plus we'll have the inside of the suite. We are asking, just for the safety of everyone else, to please be fully vaccinated for COVID-19. To register for these events, you can go to info.itechsoul.com/baseball. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today.